Story 1. This happened to me almost 8 years ago and I've never stopped thinking about it. I was in my early 20s at the time and was camping out in the wilderness of Upper Idaho. I wouldn't say I was an experienced camper, but I did go out frequently on long hikes and knew the basics of camping. In that area, there was a lot of wildlife, including black bears and grizzly bears. So being prepared was a must. This kind of environment deterred a lot of casual hikers and campers. Not many people lived up there either, and you'd only see the occasional tourist hiking a trail. Most of the campsites in Upper Idaho are not very crowded. That being said, I tried to stay away from the touristy spots and stick to lesser-known trails. For this trip, I chose one that was just outside of the well-known mountain range. The trail wound through the forest and along the hills bordering the mountain, eventually leading to a nice open spot with views of the range. The nearest trail I knew of was about 3 miles away, which led to a small lake. I assumed that there might be a few other people there, so I decided to skip it. I was right. During the whole hike, nobody else was around. The trail seemed almost unused, and when I got to the campground, it was open and completely empty. I set up my tent on the far side of the campsite and found some big stones to build a fire pit. I think I had about 2 or 3 hours of daylight left, so I wasn't planning on doing much for the rest of the day. Just sit around the campsite and think about my plans for tomorrow. When the sun set, I built up the fire and roasted some marshmallows while stargazing. The whole valley was incredibly quiet. There was just a subtle breeze coming through and the occasional wildlife calling out. But then, something interrupted the silence. A repeated crunch of leaves coming from out in the woods. After a second, it was pretty obvious that it was a person walking. I didn't know what to do except sit there and stare in that direction, shocked and confused about why someone was out there. Then they showed up at the edge of my campsite. It was a man, but with the shadows from the campfire flickering over him, I couldn't make out much to identify him. I could see he had a typical camping backpack on, but that was about it. He stood there looking at me, then at the rest of my campsite. Before I could say anything, he muttered an apology, turned around, and walked back the exact way I had heard him come from. The way he said sorry was strange. It was like he was trying to be quiet, just barely louder than a whisper. It felt really odd. What was he even sorry for? He had to be looking for a campsite. There's no way someone would just be walking around at night like that for no reason. The whole thing felt unsettling. I didn't feel in danger, but the way he acted was just different from any hiker I'd ever come across. His footsteps walked away, fading into the subtle, quiet night as if nothing had happened. Despite the strange interruption, I ended up going back to stargazing and relaxing just a few minutes afterward. I hoped wherever the guy was heading, he'd make it there soon and safely. But aside from that, I didn't think too much more about it. Several hours went by, or at least it felt like that. Clouds started to roll in, blocking out the moon and stars, casting a shadow over the entire forest. I wasn't exactly tired or ready to sleep yet, so I sat by the campfire, hoping I'd eventually get bored and sleepy enough to call it a night. But then I heard footsteps again. This time, they were more rushed, almost like panicked footsteps running through the woods in the same spot the man had come from earlier. I stood up, growing worried as they approached. Then he came into the light. I could tell by the backpack and his general figure that it was the same hiker from before. He walked further up this time, enough for me to see him better. He had a medium scruffy beard, oily black hair, and his clothes showed signs of distress. Dirt was scuffed on his face and his eyes were wide, like he was scared. Yet his mouth was straight and emotionless. "Is everything okay? You probably should have made it to your campsite by now." "It's pretty late," I said. The man stood there, catching his breath but staying on guard. His eyes looked over my right shoulder for a second, then back at me. "Are you lost? Maybe I can help," I offered. He muttered no under his breath, saying he was just hiking out in the woods and didn't mean to bother me. He spoke slowly, and the whole time his eyes were constantly shifting to something on the right side of me. He'd only glance for a split second, then his eyes would lock back onto mine. Listen, you look pretty nervous. I can help. Maybe send a radio message for you or whatever you need." He seemed to ignore what I said, but then suddenly his eyes locked onto me more intently than before. "You're camping here right now. Why?" The way he asked it was really unsettling. His eyes darted to my right again, and I couldn't resist the urge to look over my shoulder. The woods were empty and dark. I saw nothing. I was getting really creeped out now and wasn't sure how much more I wanted to talk to this guy, let alone try to help him with whatever was going on. Then he asked something even more unsettling. "Is it just you here? Are you alone? Where are the others?" Taken aback by the question, I hesitated to respond right away. Before I could even answer, he spoke again. "Have you been following me?" Something was off. His manner was changing and he was tensing up. I said no, that I didn't know what he was talking about. But then his eyes shifted onto something over my shoulder again. This time though, they didn't shift back to me. His wide, hollow eyes were locked onto something. He asked one last question. "Then why are you with her?" I instantly turned around and looked over my right shoulder, but my eyes fell on nothing. Still, just empty, dark woods. I looked back at the man. His face fell into terror, still staring beyond me before he suddenly broke into a sprint, running deeper into the woods. Within seconds, he was past all the lights and completely gone. The direction he ran in was nowhere near the trail or really anything at all. My heart was still racing. I was looking all around, especially behind me, trying to figure out what the hell that guy was talking about and what he had been seeing. In those brief moments after he asked, "Then why are you with her?" I thought I connected everything. That this man was being followed by some woman or group in the woods. And when I looked over my shoulder, I fully expected to see her standing behind me, deranged and terrifying. But now I didn't know what to believe. I was scared shitless and absolutely not staying any longer. I gathered up everything and started moving. Even though I saw the guy running the other direction from the trail, I was still on edge the entire walk. Every slight noise had me startled, expecting to see some woman following me or whoever the hell he was talking about, but I never did. I made it to my car and left. The following morning, I decided to leave a note with the police station near me about the guy out there. With more time to think about it, I was pretty worried about him. While I don't have an exact explanation for what went on that night, I can provide a decent theory for the situation after consulting dozens of people over the years. The most likely and tragic explanation is that the man may have gotten lost and had been out there for a very long time. He was probably extremely hungry and dehydrated to the point of near insanity and paranoia, thinking something or someone was following him through the woods at night. Unfortunately, not being in the right state of mind, he didn't know help when he saw it. When he found me, he was probably too paranoid to realize I could have helped him, giving him food, water, and letting him out of the woods. He might have been so out of it that he didn't even know he was lost anymore, consumed by the paranoia of whoever he thought was following him. While this is the most probable cause of the man's behavior and what happened that night, there's still no saying if it's actually true. There's a chance he really was being followed and wasn't sure whether or not I was just another stalker, part of the group, and didn't trust me. If that was the case, then him freaking me out that night likely saved my life from whoever else was out there. However, we'll probably never know for sure. The man was never found or spotted since, so unfortunately it seems he never made it out of the woods. Story 2. I was at home this night, planning to pull an all-nighter to catch up on some work papers that I needed to finish. I had procrastinated just a bit too long, and with a couple of other things coming up, I had no choice but to stay up and finish them tonight. I brewed a cup of coffee, went upstairs to my office, and closed myself in to avoid any distractions. I just had to power through the night. For a few hours, I did surprisingly well, sipping on my coffee, staying focused, and locking in. But soon enough, I could feel myself starting to fade as my coffee ran out, and so did my energy. I thought maybe stretching my legs for a minute and going downstairs to make another cup of coffee would help me reset. I got up and walked to the kitchen. But as the coffee brewed, I noticed something strange. I felt noticeably colder than I was upstairs. It felt like a cold breeze was blowing through the downstairs floor. I went over to check the thermostat and the heat was on. But the temperature was several degrees lower than it should have been. Curious, I did a little investigating. That's when I noticed something odd. The window in the back of the living room was open. Now, I did open my downstairs windows fairly often during the day, but as far as I knew, I'd never forgotten to close them before. This one was wide open, not just a small crack like I usually left them. Understandably, I was a bit shaken as I approached the window and looked at it for a moment. The thought of someone opening it and getting inside crept into my mind. But there was nothing else to justify that fear. I stuck my head outside and looked at the ground beneath the window. There were no footprints or disturbances in the dirt. There was nothing on the window either, like I'd expect to see if someone had crawled in. In moments like these, your mind always wants to tell you that you're overthinking it, that something like this would never really happen to you. I started to convince myself that I had probably just cracked open the window a bit more than usual today and forgotten to close it. With no other signs to suggest otherwise, I closed the window, grabbed my fresh cup of coffee, and went back upstairs. But over the next 30 minutes, I found my mind still wandering. I wasn't fully satisfied with the conclusion I'd come to. So, I got up and quickly gave the house a once-over, just to be absolutely certain I was alone. I found nothing and went back to work. Another hour passed. I was mentally exhausted from trying to finish everything. But then, suddenly, a loud thump behind me instantly woke me up. It was so loud, as if it had come from just behind my desk. But there was nothing there. I knew my bedroom was right on the other side of the wall and figured it had to be something from in there. But the sound was far too loud to be ignored. And with the whole window thing from earlier, it was hard not to think the worst this time. Still, I got up and walked into the hallway, opening the bedroom door. I scanned the room from the hallway before walking in slowly. From the doorway, everything looked normal. You'd think such a loud sound would be easily identifiable, like something heavy falling on the ground. But it wasn't. The floor was clear of anything. And as I searched the rest of the bedroom, there wasn't a single thing off about it. I was honestly starting to believe that pulling this all-nighter was just making me go crazy. I went back to the office, but for the next 15 minutes, it was insanely hard to focus. I knew I had heard a thump. It was so loud. How could it just be nothing? Eventually, my focus broke and I spun around in my chair, looking behind me at where the sound had come from just 15 minutes ago. As I stared at the wall, thinking about it, I suddenly felt stupid. There was a closet right there. It was a small, thin closet that I used for nothing but storage of old clothes and winter jackets. I had forgotten it even existed. Curious, but not really thinking I'd find anything, I got up and walked over to it, carelessly sliding open the door. My breath left my lungs. A surge of fear crippled over my body. I was face to face with a stranger. He was only inches from me, hidden behind all the jackets in the back of the closet. If not for the thin layer of clothes between us, he probably could have reached out and grabbed me before I even had a chance to run. I heard the entire closet tear apart as the unknown man forced his way out, chasing me. I bolted into the hallway and the man called out my name. It sent an instant shiver through me. His voice wasn't one I knew. It was gritty and disturbing, the way he said my name as if he knew me. I made it out of the house, but it seemed like the man put more effort into trying to convince me to stop running than actually chasing me. I made it to a neighbor's house around the corner, relentlessly pounding on their door until they answered and called the police for me. The man was no longer in the house when they searched it. There weren't even any signs of where he had run off to. That's pretty much where it's been left at. Some creepy, disturbing unknown man had climbed through one of my downstairs windows in the middle of the night, carefully sneaking around the house and getting to my office closet, probably while I left to check the house after noticing the open window. That means that, for likely over an hour, the man had been right behind me, watching me as I sat at my desk, working. Even worse, he knew my name. That meant it was definitely a planned break-in from a potential stalker. It's hard knowing that possibility that he might come back. Had I not pulled that all-nighter and just gone to sleep, I very well may not be here right now. Story 3. This happened just a month ago. It was the weekend, and while I usually chose to stay home and do nothing, this Saturday was different. One of my best friends was celebrating her birthday, so I kind of had to go. It wasn't supposed to be a big party, just our close group of friends hanging out, maybe having a couple of drinks and chatting for a few hours. I lived in an apartment only about a 10-minute drive from my friend's house, so around 6:30 p.m., I drove over there. The party was nothing special. It wasn't even really a party, just a social gathering, I guess. However, we did end up drinking a bit while we talked. Eventually, around 1 a.m., most people had either left or decided to spend the night. I really don't like sleeping anywhere but my own bed, but I was still a little tipsy and didn't want to risk driving. Maybe against my better judgment, I decided I'd just walk back to my apartment. My friends said it was fine to leave my car in their driveway. I'd made the walk plenty of times before. It was just 25 to 30 minutes and mostly through quiet suburban streets. I said bye to the friends who were still there and set off on the walk home. The weather was calm and the walk started off fine. The whole neighborhood was silent and still. No moving cars, no people outside, not even any lights on in the homes. Everyone was probably asleep. But then at one point as I walked, a pair of headlights suddenly appeared down the road. They weren't too bright and the car was going slowly. Until it got really close to where I was and rolled to a stop. They cracked their window, but with it being dark and them not fully rolling it down, I couldn't really see them at all. A man's voice called out asking if I was okay or needed a ride anywhere. I said I was fine and thanked him, and without any further conversation, they drove off. I thought nothing of it. From his voice, he sounded like he genuinely wanted to know if I was okay. I kept walking along the same road. Another couple minutes went by as the neighborhood was just as quiet as before. But then a street sign in front of me reflected a light from behind me. I turned around seeing that same car coming down the road opposite of the way he came down before. He ended up pulling off to the side of the road though and parking rather than passing by me. I still found it strange that he turned around and came back this way only to stop and park as soon as he was in view of me. Seemed like a really big coincidence. I kept walking, checking behind me a few times, but the guy never left his car and eventually he was out of sight. I made it to the next section of the neighborhood, hoping this was nothing to worry about. But of course, walking alone in the middle of the night made everything feel extra suspicious. I started to feel better with every passing minute though. I was only about 10 minutes away from my apartment at this point when I suddenly noticed a car parked up ahead. It was parked in the street with its headlights on, but not on the side of the street or on the curb. It was right in the middle of the road. As I got closer, I was able to make out more details and it was definitely the same car from before. A lump formed in my throat and I felt my heart race. The chances of this being a coincidence were getting smaller by the second. From where I was, there were only 2 routes to get to my apartment. Usually, I just walked along this road because it would take me most of the way there. But I knew there was also a park up ahead that had a walking path cutting through the woods. I rarely used it, especially at night, because the path through the woods had no lights and it was usually safer just to stay on the street. But in this moment, I was starting to think that it might be less risky to go through the woods rather than walk past the car that was clearly watching me a bit too closely for comfort. As I got closer to the entrance to the trail, I realized the car was parked strangely close to it, just a little ahead of the path. I could make it to the trail before passing the car, but it almost seemed too perfect. The more I looked at the woods, the more uneasy I felt. I had to go with my gut. I kept walking past the entrance to the woods and moved toward the car. I held my breath as I passed it, expecting something to happen. But nothing did. Once I got to the front of the car, I looked back. Through the windshield, I could see that nobody was inside. The car that had been following me and parked right in the middle of the road with its headlights on was empty. After a few seconds of thinking, I looked back toward the woods. Barely visible through the darkness, I saw the figure of a man standing behind the trees, watching me. That was it. I took no more chances. I started running and only a few seconds later, I heard the man get into his car. I pulled my phone out as I ran, hoping the sight of it might deter him. Thankfully, it seemed to work. Instead of chasing me, he made a U-turn and drove off. I didn't stop running until I got home. Once there, I immediately called the police and reported what seemed like an attempted kidnapping. It was all just too coincidental not to be. What's truly terrifying to think about is that if I hadn't trusted my gut and decided to cut through the woods, I would have walked straight into the man's trap. He would have been waiting there, knowing exactly what I'd do. Being out there with him in the woods at night would have left me with no chance of escape. It's only been a month since that night, and with just a description of his car and his voice,